Sensationally silver, because you are.
Welcome, everyone, to Sensationally Silver, A State of Mind, conversations with extraordinary, ordinary persons of age, people who are going to bring you information, inspiration, and validation. Join us. Hello, and welcome to Sensationally Silver, A State of Mind, conversations with extraordinary, ordinary persons of age. My guest today has what I think is a fascinating topic to discuss. I think you'll find it fascinating too. And maybe you have a personal interest in it. His name is Don Anderson. He does a podcast that you might want to visit called Missing Pieces hyphen NPE. Okay, welcome, Don, and tell us what that means.
Hi, thank you, Robin. I'm so glad to see you and to be on your show. So NPE, so the podcast name is Missing Pieces NPE Life. So NPE is an acronym that stands for Not Parent Expected, and it originally came from genealogy, and it meant like it was non-paternal event, which meant that the father of the birth certificate wasn't really the father. And so it kind of, I don't know when, but morphed into not parent expected. And now it's become, so it used to refer to the event, but now we use it as a noun. So like, oh, are you an NPE? Oh, he's an NPE. Where it used to be, he had an NPE, right? And so it's kind of morphed over time, but it just basically means somebody who finds out one or both of their parents isn't who they thought.
Okay, so basically, it can be a surprise, a big surprise, right?
Definitely. Yes. Usually it's a giant surprise.
And I
And
think you've got a story about that, Don. Are you willing to tell us that story?
yeah. So here's my story in a nutshell. So I grew up crazy childhood, crazy, two different households, mom's crazy life, dad's crazy life, and blah, blah, blah. So as an adult, I started hearing rumors that my sister, who I grew up thinking was my full sister, we'll call her Tammy with a Y. She was, my mom was pregnant when she met my dad, right? And he knew about it. Those were the rumors. They, like 25 years ago, they denied the rumors, said it wasn't true. Lo and behold, how information gets passed down in my family. Someone got drunk, someone um, brought it up again, and this time my sister pressed and pressed, and they admitted it that my mom was pregnant when she met my dad. He knew about it, right? And decided to marry her and to raise Tammy with the Y as his own. Flash forward 2 years later, this was about 5 years ago, Tammy the Y couldn't figure out who her bio father was. So I said, you know what? I'll do a DNA test on 23andMe. And that way we can compare, like, whoever I'm not related to is on your dad's side. So I put up my DNA test, got the results, and when my results came in, Tammy with a Y was there, but also there were two half sisters I'd never heard of. Two half sisters I never knew existed. Two half sisters that weren't related to Tammy with a Y. So, I mean, most people, it takes a while to figure out what's what when you get they say, depend on which research you listen to, but basically, 3 to 10% of people that do a DNA test will have a DNA surprise. It's not always your dad's not your dad. It could be your uncle had a kid that no one knew about, that kind of thing. But but most people, it isn't as easy and to figure out. Like with me, there were two sisters, and I quickly went through all the scenarios in my head and realized my dad wasn't my dad, and which brought up a ton of emotions, as you can imagine. I usually describe it to people who haven't been through it before. It's kind of like your feet are no longer touching the floor, but not because you're floating, it's because the floor is no longer there. It's just everything, for visual reasons, I had a Norwegian flag here. You guys asked me to take it down, but I was so into being Norwegian. When I was 16 years old, I saw a family tree on an uncle's wall, and it had our people, our ancestry going back to Norway to the guy and woman who came over on the boat in 1850, sold their farm in Norway. I, as an adult, went to Norway, found the farm they sold, and it was like this spiritual experience that I had with Norway. Like I make Norwegian meatballs for Christmas. And then to find out I wasn't Norwegian was like heartbreaking. Like, just, that was the worst part about it.
It sounds like that was harder on you than maybe finding out your father wasn't your father. Is that true?
It definitely is true. And I mean, and I kind of feel bad about that in a way because, I mean, he passed away last May, so he's never going to hear this, but he wasn't a good father, right? And there were a lot of things that um, I don't know how to explain. It gets into such deep stuff, and but like I always felt like I didn't belong. Like seriously, 6 months before that test came in, I would, how you lie awake in the middle of the night and you can't sleep and you start thinking about shit happened 25 years ago, that kind of thing. Excuse me, I didn't mean to cuss. But anyway, it was one of those nights, and it happened a lot where I would just like, how do I exist? Like it doesn't make sense. Like I never once thought for a moment that my dad wasn't my dad, but it was just like, I'm just way smarter than both of my parents. I just am. I'm not bragging. It's just, it's not something you earn, like, it's just you're born with it or not, right? And I was always a better athlete. Like I was the only one in my family that was an athlete. I just didn't, like, it didn't make sense how I existed. So when I found out my dad wasn't my dad, like to find out you're not a fluke is huge. Like I was so grateful that he wasn't my dad. And then he found out about it. He didn't know. Well, it's he always wondered, I guess, is what happened. And we never had a very close relationship. But after I found out, and then after one of my sister told him, after we kind of all agreed not to tell him because he was old and his health wasn't doing so good. But then he got better, and so one of my sisters that I grew up with told him, and we ended up getting closer than we ever have been, and because we got to talk about it, like, you know what I mean, um, and like, although he's really was a flawed human being, like all of us are, he had his flaws, but like because he was no longer my mirror, if that makes sense, like that whole thing left me, right?
That feeling of not matching,
Yeah.
not not lining up. Yeah. Yeah.
And that, sorry, I'm getting emotional. But then this thing happened where all of a sudden I got to see him as a man that raised a son who he always thought probably wasn't his, and how honorable that was. He didn't do it perfectly. And so it just, in a weird way, it made me so grateful I wasn't his son. And then it brought us closer together. So it was, I don't know. I always call it, Robin, just staying wide awake to the universe. Just, whatever happens, just let it happen. Be a part of it, be in the moment, be open to new possibilities. And it happened that we repaired our relationship before he died because I wasn't a son. So,
As in my former career as a therapist and in my training when I was in graduate school, I remember being taught that what creates a dysfunctional family is not stress, it's not the problems, it's the secrets. So the problems can be huge, but people can deal with them without things becoming dysfunctional. The dysfunction comes from we can't talk about it and we don't even know what we're not able to talk about. It's a secret. That makes people crazy. And that's what I'm hearing, Don, that no one no one had terrible intentions here. The intentions were probably absolutely the best, but the result was something that didn't work. It didn't work. And when the secret was revealed, it did work because now
Mm,
you were living in reality. And there's a
yeah,
relief that comes with that. Sometimes it doesn't even make sense, but it's very, very real. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I remember talking to a friend of mine, his sister. Like we were at their house for a party, and I told her about my experience, and she was a therapist. And at the time, I hadn't told my dad yet, and she just said, "Don, nothing good comes from keeping a family secret." And then she told me her story, which was her parents were European, and when she was 13, her grandmother from Eastern Europe whispers to her, like they lived in LA, and said, "We're Jewish, but don't tell anybody." And she said that keeping that secret like totally messed her up. Like, you know what I mean? So you're right. I think, if you say it out loud, we can deal with it. That's a very good point.
There's something about being able to claim who we really are and what our story really is that is so relieving. It's
Mm,
huge.
yeah.
So this led this profound experience and awakening. Is that fair to say? An awakening led you to do your podcast, right?
Yes.
And what's that
Yes.
been like? I bet you've got some wonderful stories to tell.
Oh my God. I mean, I absolutely love it. And I love telling stories and I love kind of editing, making them like a documentary, putting music in. I love it. And it's, the first episode was actually that friend of mine's sister, his wife, who I'm pretty close with. She's good friends with my wife. Um, this was long before I knew I was an NPE. And before she knew what the term meant, we were at a dinner party and she whispers to me, or no, we're talking about, I'll go, we were talking about how screwed up our childhoods were. And it's very rare that someone can beat me at that game, right? But she beat me and she's like, kind of looked around, make sure nobody could hear. She goes, "Did I ever tell you about my parents?" And I'm telling you, Rob, if anybody ever says that to you, they're about to drop a bomb. And her bomb was that her parents were both shot in the head when she was 4 years old. Neither of them died that night, but dad was LAPD. This was in 1964, and she 40 years later does a DNA test, and they never solved the murder, right? Because the dad eventually died. And she does a DNA test and finds out her dad wasn't her dad. Her dad, biologically, was their parents' best friend, who was also LAPD, which put a big twist on that night, a murder of possibilities that could have happened. And it was an ongoing affair because her older sister by 4 years was also his daughter. So, yeah, there's a lot of stories like that. And then there's just amazing stories, um, that just there's one about me and my four sisters. So I have ended up being four new sisters for me, right? So they were all full siblings. They were all four girls born within 5 years to the same parents, one being my bio dad. And I got super close with a couple of them. One super, super close, Tammy with an I. And it was amazing. So I sent her your podcast from your last episode. I think it was your last episode with your son because she also lives in Mexico. And I was like, oh, you're really gonna love this. He like thinks of Mexico the same way you do and stuff. And so I talked to her yesterday. But anyway, so I have an episode with the four of them kind of telling it from their point of view of finding me as opposed to me telling them, from me finding them. And so I always try to mix it up. I try to have people that like somebody actually, Dana. I don't know if you remember Dana from Michigan when we used to hang out, but she for Monday night, but she had her husband gets a call or an email or something from a woman in my hometown, quite ironically, in Iowa, and says, "Hey, I'm your daughter," right? And so Dana had some problems like accepting that. Like, she thought she'd given her husband his firstborn. Like, there's just all this stuff. And Dana's fine with it now, but I love promoting that understanding, right? Because Dana has, a lot of NPEs would judge Dana, right? Like be not accepting the other person right away. But I think that I try to promote understanding. Like Dana definitely has a point of view and there's definitely emotion involved there. And let's talk about it, right? And so I have that. I just, there's a lot of stuff and I have helped people find their parents, their biological parents. There was my wife and all of her friends go to the same hairstylist named Cindy. So I started going back when I had hair. and and one of the stylists there said, I don't know who my dad is. I never figured it out. And Cindy said, oh, I know just the guy for you to talk to. So she put us in touch with Deanna was her name. And, when you're trying to solve a DNA mystery, like you have to have somebody do a DNA test, right? And then get the results. And then you like very rarely is it as obvious as mine was where you get a half sibling or a biological parent. Usually you get like second cousins and you have to a second cousin means you share great grandparents, and then it's just a lot of it's how they found the Golden State, the Golden State killer, that that unsolved murder for what 40 years I think it was, and then they used genetic genealogy and figured out who it was. So there's a lot of, and I love it. I absolutely, if I could do one thing the rest of my life, it would be solve DNA mysteries. I love, it's like a puzzle, and it's just, I could be in my computer all weekend doing nothing but that, and I would be so happy. Um, but getting back to Deanna, so I finally figured out who it was, right? And, and there was a cousin that I found. And like I become a total detective. I can find anybody, you need anybody to track down Robin, let me know. I have all the tools. But I found a cousin who would have been a first cousin of this, who I thought the biological father was. Let's just call him Steve, right? And so I wrote this person and I sent a text, which is sometimes usually not the way to do it. To usually you would want to say, hey, I'm trying to figure out how we're related, blah blah blah, right? Just keep it like, not say, hey, your dad, well, or whatever. But I just was honest with her and I just said, hey, I have this woman, I helped figure out her thing, and I think your uncle Steve might be her biological dad. About 20 minutes later, I get a phone call and I recognized the number was the one I just texted. And I picked it up and she was crying, this woman, and she was saying, I'm so sorry I had to call. I can't believe this happened. She said, my Uncle Steve wasn't a good man, and I haven't thought about him in 20 years. And I was driving through Glendale near our old neighborhood where we all, where they grew up. And him and his another brother, Steve, and his other brother had moved to Sunset Beach, which is a small town, I guess, down in Orange County or whatever on the beach, surfers. And she was like, and I was driving through the old neighborhood and saw a bumper sticker in front of me that said, where the hell is Sunset Beach? She's like, I pulled over and I texted my Uncle Dave and said, hey, and she had taken a picture and sent him the picture of she goes, hey, I haven't talked to you in a while, but this made me think about you and Uncle Steve. I hadn't talked to him in 10 years or whatever. 10 minutes later, she gets a text from a random guy saying, hey, I think your Uncle Steve might be the biological father. You know what I mean? Like she was just that impact of how the universe just all came together. Just, uh, I don't know, she was crying and it was a very emotional yet um, gratifying experience for her. And she met with Deanna, they're cousins. And so they formed a relationship. And it's just, I don't know. It's just, I just love stuff like that.
So, Don, it isn't always a happy ending, though, is it? I mean, sometimes people
No.
do resist it right on through.
Oh,
They
yes.
don't welcome this new person in their life with open arms. It's like, I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know you. What about that? Because that might keep a lot of people from being willing to investigate this whole thing. My audience tends to be older people. And sometimes there's more pressure as we get older to maybe delve into some of those secrets or open them up. Maybe if someone knows I'm the only one who knows this, when I'm gone, nobody will ever have this information. Maybe I should tell all that stuff. But those negative responses might stop somebody. So I just want you to talk about that because it sounds like you've got a lot of various information and experience.
Yeah, there are a lot of negative, and I don't really know the um the stats on how many that are negative, you know what I mean? Because I think one thing is that people that are normally that have positive experiences are more open to talk about it and go on a podcast, right? So I think what you hear and see is probably skewed toward the positive. But a lot of times it's just the people in my shoes, the NPE just hit a stone wall. Like the people don't want anything to do with them. Um, and from the beginning, I've obsessed on why this is so. Like, why are some people getting? I mean, my sisters welcomed me with open arms, right? But the first thing they said was, "I'm not surprised our dad was a player," right? And so I met this woman. There's like conferences, like there's a convention that they have called Untangling Your Roots, and then there's another one called I don't know. But anyway, I went to Untangling Your Roots. I was like on a panel there last couple of years ago, and I met this woman who was in the adoption world, and I asked her about that, and she was saying that she's also been obsessed with that question: why do some people get upset, get rejected? And and what she told me, I haven't proved it not to be true yet. It's how the kids or the wife perceive their dad or husband, right? So, say for instance, if your dad was a church going man, pillar of the community, honest as the day is long, and you find out he has a kid that he cheated on his wife, like it's going to be a lot harder for you to accept that new person coming in, right? And if you thought your dad was a player, right, it's a little easier because it was somewhat expected. And so, I mean, it can be heartbreaking for people that find out and don't and hit that, you know, that wall. But like I said, I'll tell you a story real quick about an older woman if we have a second. It's one of my most popular episodes, and it's called Change of Heart. And so I kind of tell it from the story of the sister, not the NPE, the sister that finds out she has an NPE sister, but doesn't know if she knows she's an NPE. So she backs off. Eventually, they meet and talk, and they have an amazing relationship. But the dad's wife would be the NPE's stepmom, for lack of a better word, right? Very religious woman, very church going. The NPE was born before she even knew her husband, but she would not accept this woman. And it was heartbreaking because her other kids loved this new woman, right? And and in the episode, I talked to the son, so that half sibling of the NPE, and he went to his mom and just said, "Mom, if you're going to be like this, you're not welcome in my house at Thanksgiving, whatever." And this woman just had a change of heart right there in the moment. And in the episode, he and I are both crying, and because she was just saying, "I'm sorry. I was wrong. You're absolutely right." And and they were Christians, and he was just saying, "This isn't what you taught me as a Christian to, not welcome people like this." And she's amazing, whatever. And it's just, which I'm telling you, that is very, very rare that someone has that change of heart. Like once they shut the door usually stays closed.
But maybe they don't hear that magic phrase like she did from her son. For her, that was the magic phrase that invited her to be more who she was in this very uncomfortable and for her sad and alarming and all that kind of situation, to just be invited to be true to herself and her own principles. Um, yeah. Wow. Don, you're dealing with some of the biggest issues in life with this. Okay. Tell me another story. I want to hear another story.
What kind of story? Which Um,
Let's have a right across the board happy ending.
well, my latest episode is a very happy ending, and it's actually one of the most similar to my own. Um, well, I'll tell you a story real quick before I get to that about me, more about me. So, and this brings it back to Mexico too. So, like around the year 2000, this friend of mine, Andy, was Don, come to Club Med with me. I need a wingman, and I didn't know what Club Med was, never been, but I need, I was working in the film business, and I was single at the time, and I needed a break, like, so I had in between jobs, so I went down to this place, and it was um, on the mainland on the Sea of Cortez. So not on Baja, but across from Baja on the Sea of Cortez. And, whatever. Had a 3 or 4 days in Club Med, didn't think anything of it. Flash forward to many years later when I found out my dad was my dad, and I talked to Tammy with an I for the first time, and she told me she lived in Mexico. And I'm like, oh, really? Where? And she told me kind of where it was geographically, like you just drive a straight line south from Tucson till you get to the Sea of Cortez, and that's where it is. And I'm like, I think I was around there. And I Googled Club Med, Mexico, and there was only one like out by Acapulco. And so I'm like, oh, I guess not. Maybe I'm just, remembered weird. Cut to, she owns a real estate company down there. And my wife and I were going to go there and shoot a promo for the town, right? So we came up with this really cute concept. So we went down there to film, and we were out scouting, and we're on this beach where we were going to shoot the final scene. And there was these buildings out kind of like almost boarded up with a fence around them. And I'm like, I just stopped and I'm like, what is that? And they're like, oh, that's an old Club Med. And they said my face just turned white. And they're like, what? And I'm like, I've been here before. And it's where my bio dad lived. My sister followed him down there. So he lived there at the time in 2000 when I was there. In the same small town in Mexico, like 5,000 people. He lived there and I had visited it. Like, that's amazing coincidence. So that's one story. But anyway, so the story about the one I just had. So it's this woman grew up, never knew who her dad was. And then finally she was told who her dad was. And this guy named Austin, and they were Canadian. So she lived in Canada. She developed a relationship with him as an adult. Once she had kids, she was like, blah, blah, blah. She had two half brothers on that side, had a good relationship with the stepmom that became her mother figure. They were really close. Cut to 30 years later, she does a DNA test, and Austin's not her dad. And which was heartbreaking for her. But then she found these two sisters who she lives in North Carolina now, the NPE, and the two sisters lives in Canada. And she went to visit them, and they had videos at the airport where they're singing like, we are family, got all my sisters and me, and posters that said, Merry Christmas. And it was just the most heartwarming story because they just welcomed her. And and I questioned it. I went back to my, I told because I interviewed both the NPE and then one of the sisters. And I was telling one of the sisters, I'm like, it's kind of a miracle that you guys accepted her because your father abandoned you guys when you were 4. Like, you would think that anything from him you would just outright reject. And she's basically said, I never received any gifts from my father. Like, this is the one gift I got from him. And she's an amazing person. And, it's just, I love that. I absolutely love that because there's nothing wrong. I don't care if you love everyone in your life, right? You love your family like there's no other family. There's nothing wrong with loving one more person. You know what I mean? And it's just, another thing I will say, and someone told me this, one of my people on my podcast, and I loved it. And she said that when people question NPEs, like, why do you want to reach out to this family? You don't even know them. They're not, whatever. And her response was, which I repeat now as my own, is just say, for instance, Robin, your daughter Piper. So you found out she was switched at birth. She's not your daughter, right? There was another little baby. Like, you would not love Piper any less than you do now. You're still her mother. She's still your daughter. You still have this amazing relationship that when I see you guys together, I know is there. And it wouldn't make you love her any less. But wouldn't you be curious about the real Piper? To see if she had your eyes, to see if she, had your personality. Like, you know what I mean? Like you don't have to give up one to get the other. Is like the point of all that.
And there is a kind of a rediscovering of yourself when you meet other people that you are genetically related to. I don't have a story like yours, Dawn, or like the people on your podcast. But when I was in my 40s, I went back to Maryland to meet my four half sisters. My father and mother divorced, and he had four more girls. And I never knew my father when I was growing up. Um, this is way too much information for everybody, but I was literally conceived the night my parents said goodbye to each other. This was over in Honolulu after they met after Pearl Harbor. He was over there in the military. And so I didn't know him. They never got back together. And here were these four half sisters. I swear there is a horse gene, and I've got it. I did not see that reflected in the family I grew up with, which was my mother, my sister, and my grandmother. Nobody was into animals, much less horses. But when I met those four half sisters, they all made their living with horses. And it was like coming home for me. It was the first time I'd seen this huge part of me reflected back to me. And I loved it. And the oldest of those four girls, I just adore her, absolutely love her. So I understand what you're saying from a little bit different perspective, but that that opening up of what your life is and having reflected back to you who you are, because I
Mhm.
imagine that happens all the time. These newfound people say, "Oh my God, you do this just like I do," or you whatever. My son is the absolute image of what my father was. I have photographs, and he looks so much like my father. So that genetic thing is really, really strong.
Yeah, what you're talking about is genetic mirroring.
Yeah. Okay. That's the phrase.
Yeah.
Perfect sense.
Yeah, and it is so important. And I had the same thing with my new sisters. I'm telling you, like the first day I was Zooming with one of them, or maybe it was the second day I found out. And Lisa was standing back just watching, and she got tears in her eyes, and she's like, "Oh my God, you finally." She's the one that coined the phrase "missing pieces," by the way, for my podcast. She was like, "You finally found your missing pieces." Like, I'm so much more like these sisters than when I grew up. It's not even close. It's like night and day. It's like I just fit in, and you know what I mean? It's the greatest feeling in the world. And also, too, there's the whole thing about, you know, we don't have a shared history of growing up, but sometimes that could be a good thing. Like there's no baggage, absolutely no baggage, right? And so it's easier, I think, than, a lifelong of, if you didn't get along with one of your siblings or never saw things the same way or whatever. But I'm glad I found out. I am absolutely love my new sisters and Tammy with an I. We were so close, and I loved her immediately and fully, and she was the same way. And I walked her down the aisle when she got married in Mexico, and it's just, but they do have that thing. They'll say, "Oh my God, you're when you turn your head this way, you look just like our dad."
Yeah. John, we need to stop now. And I thank you for being my guest. And thank you for being so open about some very intimate parts of your life. Thank you for what you're doing for other people who are involved in this search and these reunions when they welcome them. What an incredible gift. And I want to ask you as we close for what you want to say to all the viewers today. Maybe this isn't part of their lives, but maybe it is. Do you have any words that you want to share with the people who are with us?
I mean, I think if somebody turns up in your life that's an NPE, just you don't have to walk through the door, but just leave it open. Just leave it open for a possibility of something new that might be great. And not guaranteed, right? Not guaranteed, but just leave the door open. And the other thing is, if you're going to do a DNA test, expect a surprise. It could be a good one, but just DNA doesn't lie. The truth is going to be there. So I hope that's okay.
I love that. I think maybe that applies to all of us all the time, and maybe especially as we get older, to remember to leave the door open for the surprises. Don, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you. Remember that Sensationally Silver, a State of Mind, is brought to you by Sensationally Silver, our hair care products, which are created especially for people with naturally gray and white hair. So if you're one of those people, try them. They're on Amazon now, and they're wonderful. We're so proud of them. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you, Don, so much.
Thank you.
Great news, everybody. Our premier hair care product line, Sensationally Silver, is now available on Amazon. You can order it so easily, you can get it so quickly, and you can be so sensationally silver.
Sensationally silver.